For 3 centuries, the most powerful empire on earth tried to silence a movement that owned no armies, held no political office, and met in hidden rooms. This is the story of how the Roman Empire attempted to crush the early church and why it failed. When Christians refused to worship the emperor, Rome did not see devotion, it saw defiance. In an empire where religion was political loyalty, refusing to burn incense before Caesar was more than a spiritual choice. It was a public challenge to imperial unity. Under emperors like Nero, believers were turned into scapegoats, blamed for disasters, executed in spectacles meant to intimidate. Later, under Decius and Diocletian, persecution became systematic. Churches destroyed, scriptures burned, leaders imprisoned. The goal was clear: erase Christianity from history. It nearly worked. The church was small, vulnerable, socially marginal. Entire communities were forced to choose between survival and conviction. Some faltered, many stood firm. And in that crucible of suffering, something unexpected happened. Persecution clarified belief, strengthened identity, and exposed the limits of imperial power. Why would the most powerful empire in the world feel threatened by people who owned no weapons, held no office, and gathered quietly inside private homes? Rome ruled through legions, law, and spectacle. Christians possessed none of that. They had no territory, no political program, no army waiting in the shadows. And yet, within a few generations, the Roman state moved from indifference to suspicion, from suspicion to hostility, and from hostility to organized repression. This was not a clash between equal forces. It was an empire confronting something it could not measure. Rome understood rebellion. It knew how to crush revolts. It knew how to negotiate with local religions. What it did not understand was a community that obeyed civil law, paid taxes, prayed for the emperor, and still refused to acknowledge him as ultimate. That refusal was quiet, it was consistent, and it was dangerous. The persecution of the early church was not a sudden explosion of hatred. It was a calculated response to something Rome perceived as destabilizing. Public executions, confiscated property, burned scriptures, imprisoned leaders. The intention was clear: isolate the movement, intimidate its followers, and force visible conformity. The empire believed pressure would dissolve conviction. Instead, something unexpected happened. The very mechanisms designed to silence Christianity clarified its identity. The very fear meant to weaken it exposed a deeper strength. Rome was convinced it was defending order. In reality, it was confronting a form of allegiance it could not control. To understand why persecution nearly crushed the early church, we must first understand what Rome valued most. The Roman Empire was not built on private belief. It was built on public performance. Loyalty in Rome was something you demonstrated, not something you felt. Ritual sacrifice was not merely religious devotion, it was civic participation. To burn incense before the image of the emperor was to affirm stability, unity, and allegiance to the imperial system. Rome tolerated diversity. It absorbed foreign gods, allowed local traditions, and rarely interfered with private worship. What it could not tolerate was refusal to participate in the shared rituals that symbolized political cohesion. Religion functioned as a visible glue that held a vast and diverse empire together. Christians did not attack temples. They did not organize uprisings. They did something more unsettling. They abstained. When ordered to sacrifice, they declined. When commanded to acknowledge Caesar as Lord, they remained silent or confessed another name. To Roman authorities, this was not humility. It was defiance disguised as piety. The empire did not demand that Christians stop worshiping their God. It demanded that they add one more gesture to their practice. One act of incense, one public acknowledgement, one visible sign that they belonged to the civic body. And Christians refused. That refusal disrupted the visual language of loyalty on which Rome depended. In a society where unity was performed in public spaces, a community that opted out created suspicion. If they would not honor the emperor before the crowd, what else might they refuse? Rome believed visible conformity guaranteed stability. Christianity insisted that true allegiance could not be performed falsely. That tension was not theological abstraction, it was political friction. And once Rome began to see Christians as people who would not perform loyalty, the next question became inevitable. If they will not show loyalty, where does their loyalty truly lie? If Rome's strength was built on what could be seen, Christianity introduced something Rome could not display, regulate, or parade through its streets. The empire ruled land, borders, cities, and institutions. Its authority was territorial, measurable, visible in stone roads and marching legions. Christianity spoke of a kingdom that had no geographic center and no imperial capital. It proclaimed a reign that did not depend on armies or decrees. That language was not poetic metaphor, it was political tension. When Christians confessed Jesus as Lord, they were not staging a revolt, they were declaring ultimate allegiance to someone Rome had executed. The title Lord was not neutral in the first century, it carried weight. It implied sovereignty, it implied authority that stood above all other authorities. From Rome's perspective, this was deeply unsettling. The empire could tolerate multiple gods because none of them demanded exclusive loyalty that displaced civic identity, but Christianity did. It asked its followers to place every earthly authority beneath a transcendent one. That did not make Christians anarchists. Many were known for discipline, honesty, and obedience to civil law, yet their obedience had limits. And limits are dangerous to empires. An invisible kingdom cannot be besieged, it cannot be blockaded, it cannot be dissolved by decree. Rome could destroy a building, it could arrest a bishop, it could burn a scroll. But how do you extinguish a conviction rooted in the belief that death itself is not the end? The problem was not numbers at first, it was durability. Christianity spread along trade routes, through households, across social classes. It did not rely on one city or one leader. It functioned through networks of relationships, bound not by fear of punishment, but by shared hope. Rome knew how to defeat external enemies. It struggled when confronted with internal allegiances that did not map neatly onto its structures. If Christians were loyal citizens yet claimed a higher loyalty, where did that leave the emperor's claim to ultimate authority? The empire sensed something it could not quantify. A community shaped by an unseen king could not be fully integrated into a system that required visible submission, and that raised a deeper concern. If this invisible kingdom redefined loyalty, what else might it redefine inside Roman society? Rome was not sustained only by armies and law. It was sustained by hierarchy. Every person knew their place. Senator above citizen, citizen above freedman, freedman above slave, men above women, patron above client. Order was visible, structured, and reinforced daily. Then small gatherings began to appear in urban homes where those lines blurred. Inside Christian assemblies, a slave could pray beside a merchant. A woman could host a congregation in her house. A foreigner could be called brother. This was not a political manifesto, it was a lived reality. When they shared bread and wine, they did so as equals before one Lord. That equality did not abolish Roman law. Slaves remained slaves in society. Women remained legally constrained. Yet within the Christian community, identity was reshaped. Dignity was no longer tied exclusively to status. Belonging was not determined by birth. For a civilization built on visible rank, this was disruptive. Christian ethics elevated the weak. It condemned infanticide. It discouraged sexual exploitation. It redefined power as service. In a culture where dominance signaled honor, this inversion of values unsettled assumptions about strength and prestige. Rome did not persecute Christians because they fed the poor. It grew suspicious because these practices quietly undermined the moral logic that justified hierarchy. When slaves and masters addressed each other as family in Christ, something subtle but significant shifted. An empire can tolerate diversity of gods. It struggles when the underlying structure of honor begins to change. The church was not storming the Senate, it was reshaping conscience. And conscience, once transformed, slowly reshapes society. If Rome perceived that Christian loyalty was divided, now it began to perceive something more. This movement was not only spiritually exclusive, it was socially transformative. And transformation inside households is far more difficult to suppress than rebellion on a battlefield. Rome was pragmatic with religion. It welcomed new gods, absorbed foreign cults, and allowed conquered peoples to maintain their rituals. As long as loyalty to the empire remained intact, diversity was manageable. The system worked because religion supported civic unity. Christianity broke that pattern. Christians did not simply add Jesus to the Roman pantheon. They refused to worship any other god. They would not burn incense to the emperor. They would not declare Caesar as divine. In a culture where religion and politics were inseparable, this refusal sounded like rebellion. To a Roman official, loyalty was visible through ritual. Participation in public sacrifice signaled allegiance. Refusal signaled defiance. Even if Christians prayed for the emperor, their unwillingness to perform the expected acts created doubt, and doubt in matters of state stability was dangerous. Rumors began to circulate, secret meetings, closed gatherings, strange language about eating flesh and drinking blood, calling each other brother and sister, refusing military service in some cases. For a society deeply concerned with order, secrecy amplified suspicion. Persecution was rarely constant or universal at first. It was local, reactive, often triggered by crisis. When famine struck or plague spread, Christians became convenient targets. Their refusal to participate in civic rights could be blamed for angering the gods. What Rome saw was not merely a new faith, it saw a community that placed ultimate allegiance beyond the empire. That was unprecedented. An empire can tolerate private devotion, it cannot easily tolerate divided sovereignty. And as Christianity continued to grow quietly within cities, households, and even military ranks, the tension between Caesar and Christ became impossible to ignore. Once suspicion turned into policy, the machinery of Rome moved with precision. Christians were arrested, interrogated, pressured to renounce their faith. The demand was simple: offer sacrifice to the emperor and live. Refuse and face consequences. Many complied. Fear is powerful, but many did not. What stunned Roman authorities was not just resistance, it was composure. Men and women walked into arenas without cursing the state. They faced execution without begging for mercy. Some even forgave their executioners. This was not the behavior of political rebels. It was the conviction of people who believed death was not the end. Public executions were meant to intimidate. They were spectacles designed to reinforce power. Yet something unexpected happened. Spectators did not always see weakness. They saw courage. They saw peace under pressure. They saw individuals who valued faith more than survival. Tertullian would later write that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. The more Rome tried to silence Christianity through violence, the more attention it drew to the faith's inner strength. Persecution exposed a paradox. Rome possessed military might, legal authority, and the power to take life. Christians possessed an unshakable hope that death could not conquer. When fear loses its grip, control begins to weaken. Authorities could destroy bodies, but they struggled to extinguish belief. Each execution raised questions among witnesses. What kind of faith produces this calm? What kind of hope makes suffering bearable? Rome understood force. It did not fully understand a movement that thrived under pressure. And as martyrdom stories spread from city to city, Christianity was no longer just a sect under suspicion. It was becoming a resilient network bonded by sacrifice, conviction, and shared suffering. There was a time when confessing Christ could cost everything. Then, almost unexpectedly, the balance shifted. The same empire that once hunted Christians began to protect them. The turning point came when imperial power encountered Christian conviction at the highest level. When Constantine rose to prominence, he did not immediately dismantle Roman structures. He did something more strategic. He granted tolerance. With the Edict of Milan, Christianity was legalized, no longer forced into the shadows. What had been whispered in homes could now be proclaimed openly. This change did not happen because Rome was defeated militarily by Christians. It happened because Christianity had already taken root inside the empire. Soldiers, merchants, mothers, officials, the faith had spread quietly through networks of relationship and witness. Suppression had failed to stop its growth. Now, the question was different. Could a faith shaped by persecution survive privilege? Imperial favor brought safety, influence, and resources. Churches were built, leaders gained visibility, theology moved from private letters to public councils. What began as a marginal movement became intertwined with power. The irony is striking. The empire that once saw Christianity as a threat now saw it as a unifying force. The same exclusivity that raised suspicion became a source of cohesion. A shared belief in one God, one Lord, one moral vision offered stability in a fractured world. But this transformation carried tension. When faith aligns with power, its witness is tested in new ways. The church was no longer defined by martyrdom. It now had to define itself within authority. Rome did not collapse because of Christianity. In many ways, Christianity reshaped Rome from within. And what started as a small, misunderstood sect would go on to influence laws, culture, philosophy, and the very identity of Europe for centuries to come. Empires rise with force and fall with exhaustion. Rome was no exception. Political instability, economic strain, internal division, and external invasions weakened its structure. Yet when imperial authority fractured in the West, something unexpected remained standing: the Church. While administrative systems collapsed, bishops organized relief. While trade routes became unsafe, Christian communities maintained communication across regions. While imperial identity faded, spiritual identity endured. What had once been seen as a fragile sect had become a stabilizing network. Christianity carried more than doctrine. It carried literacy, moral law, and a unifying worldview. Monasteries preserved texts. Churches educated leaders. The moral language shaped by the teachings of Jesus continued to influence law and social expectation long after imperial decrees lost authority. Rome as a political entity diminished. Rome as a Christian civilization evolved. The irony is profound. The empire that once executed believers became the vessel through which their faith spread across continents. The roads built for legions carried missionaries. The administrative divisions designed for control became dioceses. The Latin language that once proclaimed imperial dominance transmitted theology. Christianity did not simply survive Rome. It absorbed elements of Roman structure and redirected them toward a different vision of order. Power faded. Influence transformed. When historians debate whether Christianity caused Rome's fall or preserved its legacy, they often miss a deeper truth. Christianity outlived the empire because it was never dependent on imperial strength. Its foundation was not in the Senate or the army, it was in conviction, community, and belief in a kingdom not built by human hands. And when earthly systems crumble, ideas rooted in eternity tend to endure. When you step back and look at the collision between Rome and Christianity, it is more than ancient history. It is a pattern. A powerful system meets a conviction it cannot fully control. Authority confronts conscience. Structure confronts belief. Rome represents more than an empire. It represents any culture that builds identity around power, status, and visible loyalty. Christianity represented something different. It placed ultimate allegiance beyond the state. It defined identity beyond social rank. It taught that true authority begins within the heart. That tension did not disappear with the fall of the empire. Whenever faith challenges cultural norms, suspicion rises. Whenever moral conviction refuses to bend to public pressure, conflict follows. The early Christians were not armed revolutionaries. They were people whose internal loyalty could not be coerced. That is what unsettled Rome the most. The lesson is not about romanticizing persecution. It is about understanding influence. Systems can regulate behavior, but they struggle to dominate belief. Laws can command compliance, but they cannot manufacture conviction. The story of Rome and Christianity shows that transformation often begins quietly. It begins in households, in conversations, in private decisions that slowly reshape public reality. And here's the question that lingers. When power and conscience collide, which one truly shapes the future? History suggests that force can control a moment. Conviction can shape centuries. If Rome teaches us anything, it is this: power feels permanent until it is not. Legions marched across continents. Emperors issued decrees with absolute authority. The empire believed its structure would endure indefinitely. It did not. Christianity, by contrast, began with no army, no political leverage, no legal protection. It spread through testimony, sacrifice, and unshakable belief. It survived imprisonment, public execution, and systemic opposition. And when the empire that once opposed it weakened, the faith remained. So what truly sustains a civilization? Is it military strength, economic control, and centralized authority? Or is it moral vision, shared conviction, and a sense of transcendent purpose? Rome relied on visible dominance. Christianity relied on invisible transformation. One governed territories, the other reshaped hearts. One demanded allegiance through power, the other invited allegiance through faith. The fall of Rome was not caused by a single factor, and Christianity was not a simple replacement for imperial rule. But history makes one reality clear: structures built only on force eventually fracture. Movements grounded in belief can adapt, survive, and expand beyond borders. The deeper conflict was never only political, it was philosophical. What defines ultimate authority, the state or something higher? That question did not end in the 4th or 5th century. It continues in every society where belief and power intersect. Rome's legacy became history. Christianity became heritage. And when you examine the arc of centuries, you begin to see that the most enduring revolutions are not always the loudest. They are the ones that begin within, reshape culture quietly, and outlast the systems that once tried to silence them. Rome stood as a symbol of permanence. Its architecture projected confidence. Its law projected order. Its military projected dominance. From the outside, it looked unshakable. Yet history proved that even the greatest earthly power has limits. Christianity entered that world without spectacle. No armies defended it. No political machinery enforced it. Its founder was executed under Roman authority. According to Matthew chapter 27, verse 50 to 51, at the moment of Jesus' death, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. What seemed like defeat carried a deeper declaration. Access to God was no longer mediated by empire, institution, or status. That message moved quietly from person to person. It did not rely on fear. It relied on conviction. And conviction, once rooted deeply, is difficult to erase. Rome attempted suppression. It attempted regulation. Eventually, it attempted partnership. None of those strategies fully controlled the essence of the faith. Because Christianity was never centered on political dominance. It was centered on a kingdom described as not of this world. When we look back, we see two different models of power. One demanded visible submission. The other inspired inward transformation. One expanded through conquest. The other expanded through witness. Empires calculate strength in territory and influence. Faith measures strength in endurance and hope. Rome's structures became ruins studied by historians. The teachings of Christ continued shaping cultures, ethics, and personal lives across centuries. The story is not simply about the fall of an empire. It is about the endurance of belief. And it leaves us with a challenge that echoes beyond history. What are you building your loyalty on? What kind of power do you trust to last? Finally, when everything visible fades, only what is rooted in eternity remains.